The ocean breeze was crisp, the scent of salt lingering in the air as the ship rocked gently over the waves. Julian leaned against the polished wooden railing, a lazy smirk on his face as he looked between Emory and Hale. Well, well, he mused, tilting his head slightly. It feels good seeing the both of you here. My two old friends, he thought to himself. Hale narrowed his eyes, intrigued. You know Emory? Julian shrugged. We've crossed paths a few times. He makes quite the impression. Emory scoffed, crossing his arms. Can't say the same for you. Julian only chuckled, unfazed. He turned to Hale, his sharp gaze trailing over him in obvious admiration. I have to say, you look even better today. Hale smirked. Really? I get that a lot. The two of them fell into an easy rhythm of flirtation, exchanging sly smiles and suggestive remarks. Julian's charm was effortless, and Hale, always one to bask in attention, soaked it up with a knowing gleam in his eyes. Emory, however, was less amused. Watching them play their game made his stomach churn. It was sickening. Disgusting, he muttered under his breath, turning on his heel to leave. But just as he was about to step away, a familiar voice cut through the air. Hale. Ethan appeared on the deck, breathless, eyes darting around until they landed on Hale, and Julian, standing far too close for comfort. His expression twisted in an instant, his frustration bubbling over as he marched toward them. What the hell is this? Ethan snapped, his glare fixed on Hale. Then, his gaze shifted to Julian. And you, who even are you? Julian, ever unbothered, simply raised an eyebrow. And who might you be? His tone was polite, but the amusement in his eyes made it clear he was enjoying the drama unfolding in front of him. Ethan clenched his fists. Are you seriously flirting with him? He turned back to Hale, his voice rising. After everything? After me? Hale's expression turned cold in an instant. The warmth he had just moments ago while entertaining Julian disappeared. Don't make a scene, Ethan, he said, his voice sharp and dismissive. Ethan flinched as if he had been struck. His anger wavered, giving way to something raw, hurt. You really don't care, do you? How can you just blatantly flirt with someone else? Julian chuckled, shaking his head. Can you stop embarrassing yourself? I don't see why you're so worked up. It's just conversation. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. His breathing was uneven, his emotions all over the place, and the tension between the four of them was thick enough to cut with a knife. Before things could spiral any further, Emory stepped in. That's enough, he said firmly, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan stiffened at the contact but didn't resist when Emory gently pulled him away from the confrontation. Julian and Hale watched as they walked off, Hale sighing in relief at the sudden lack of chaos. Once they were far from the others, Ethan exhaled shakily, rubbing a hand over his face. I'm sorry, he muttered. Emory studied him for a moment. For what? Ethan's voice was quieter now, filled with something heavier. For cheating on you. He let out a bitter chuckle. I don't even know how to face you anymore. I feel guilty all the time. Emory sighed, leaning against the railing. Your apology doesn't matter to me anymore. I'm trying to move on, Ethan, he said, his voice even. You should too. Ethan swallowed. But Hale isn't interested in you. It's obvious that he just used you because you were close to me. It's what he always does, and now that he has gotten what he wants, you are nothing to him now. Emory continued, cutting him off. You need to accept that. Ethan lowered his head, his expression unreadable. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of the waves below. I'm sorry, he muttered under his breath. Like I said, I don't need your apology, Emory responded and walked away. Hale and Julian decided to go somewhere private. The air inside the dimly lit private lounge crackled with tension as Hale leaned back against the polished wooden counter, watching Julian with that signature lazy smirk. The soft hum of the ship's engine vibrated beneath their feet, but neither of them paid it any mind. Hale sighed, swirling the remains of his drink before setting the glass down with a quiet clink. I should apologize for Ethan. He can be emotional. Julian chuckled, stepping closer until there was barely any space between them. I don't mind. It's always entertaining to watch someone lose their head over you. His voice dipped lower, teasing. Can't say I blame him. Hale arched a brow, tilting his head slightly. And what about you? Are you losing your head over me? Julian smirked but didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his fingers trailing over Hale's wrist, a barely there touch that sent a shiver up Hale's spine. The air between them grew heavier, thick with something neither of them wanted to resist. Hale let out a breathy chuckle. You're dangerous. Julian leaned in, his lips just a whisper away. You have no idea. Then, like a match to dry paper, they crashed into each other. Lips met in a heated, desperate kiss, hands exploring as if they couldn't get enough. Hale pressed Julian against the counter, deepening the kiss, his fingers curling into Julian's hair. Julian responded with equal fervor, tugging Hale closer until there was no space left between them. After what felt like an eternity, they pulled away, breathing heavily. Julian's fingers traced over Hale's jaw, his eyes dark with something unreadable. Tonight, he murmured. My cabin. I'll pick you up. Hale's lips curled into a knowing smile. I'll be there. Julian left first, stepping into the corridor, his body still buzzing from their encounter. As he turned a corner, he nearly collided with someone. Ah, my apologies, Julian said smoothly, stepping back with a polite nod. The man he bumped into, Devon Montgomery, studied him with an odd expression, his brow furrowing slightly. There was something in the way his gaze lingered that made Julian's muscles tighten. No problem, Devon said slowly. Have we met before? Julian's smile was easy, practiced. Doubtful. I think I'd remember. Devon didn't look convinced, but before he could say anything else, Julian nodded and continued walking. He could feel Devon's gaze on his back as he disappeared down the hallway. Later that evening, Julian sat in his private cabin, the gentle sway of the ship barely noticeable as he listened to Nikki's report. The sleek, modern room was a stark contrast to the antique charm of the rest of the ship, a reminder of the wealth and power he held. The finances are steady, Nikki said, adjusting his glasses. We made a good profit from the last deal, and the offshore accounts are untouched. No issues. Julian nodded, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. And the Montgomerys? Ethan and his dear mother? Nikki shrugged. They're comfortable. Nothing unusual on their end. Julian swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his gaze distant. Good. Nikki studied him for a moment before leaning back in his chair. And what about Hale? Julian's lips curved slightly as he took a slow sip. Things are progressing well. I like him. Nikki raised an eyebrow. Like him? Julian chuckled, setting the glass down. If things go well. I might even spare him from the revenge I have planned for his family. Nikki exhaled, shaking his head. You're playing a dangerous game. Julian smirked, his eyes gleaming with something unreadable. Aren't I always? The cabin was dimly lit, the glow from the bedside lamp casting long shadows as Hale adjusted the collar of his shirt in the mirror. He hummed to himself, clearly pleased with his reflection. Emory, standing by the doorway with his arms crossed, watched with barely concealed irritation. Where are you going? Emory finally asked, though he already knew the answer. Hale didn't even spare him a glance. Instead, he smirked at his reflection, smoothing down his hair. Out. Emory's patience thinned. With Julian? Hale turned then, his expression playful yet sharp. Why do you care? You've decided to become a monk, haven't you? Shouldn't you be off somewhere praying? I don't trust him, Emory said, ignoring the jab. There's something off about him. Hale chuckled, leaning against the dresser with his arms crossed. You're just jealous. Emory's brows furrowed. Jealous? Yes, Hale said smoothly. Jealous that while you're dedicating yourself to a pure and boring life, I get to enjoy passion, thrill, the pleasures of the world. He smirked. And Julian is quite a pleasure. Emory clenched his fists. You're being reckless. Hale rolled his eyes. You sound like an old man. He stepped closer, lowering his voice mockingly. Do you really think you can save me from myself, dear monk? Emory exhaled, forcing himself to remain calm. I just don't want you to get hurt. Hale's expression flickered for a moment, something unreadable passing through his eyes, but he quickly masked it with another smirk. I appreciate the concern, he said, voice laced with sarcasm, but I'll be just fine. And with that, he grabbed his coat and strode out the door, leaving Emory standing alone in the silence. The night air was crisp and salty as Emory stepped onto the docks, inhaling deeply to clear his mind. The waves lapped gently against the ship's hull, the quiet hum of the night surrounding him. He leaned against the railing, staring out at the dark waters, his thoughts tangled. Then, without warning, the ship gave a sudden jolt, as if it had hit something. Emory lost his footing, his body tilting dangerously over the edge. Strong hands caught him just in time. Emory's breath hitched as he looked up, only to find himself inches away from Julian. The grip on his waist was firm, steady, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Julian smirked, holding Emory a little longer than necessary before pulling him back onto stable ground. Careful, he murmured. It would be a shame if you fell in. I hear the sea isn't kind to lost souls. Emory swallowed hard, his pulse still unsteady from the near fall, and from Julian's presence. I had it under control. Julian chuckled. Of course you did. His fingers grazed Emory's wrist lightly before letting go completely. Though, I have to say, for someone who claims to be a monk, you have a very intense way of looking at me. Emory tensed, forcing himself to look away. I don't know what you're talking about. Julian tilted his head, eyes gleaming with amusement. If you say so. Unbeknownst to them, Hale stood a few feet away, hidden by the shadows. His jaw tightened as he watched the scene unfold, something sharp and unpleasant twisting in his chest. He didn't like what he was seeing. Not one bit. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel for more episodes.